بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم الحمد لله الحمد لله الحمد لله. All praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our creator, our nourisher, our sustainer. That one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that despite all of our faults, all of our weaknesses and all of our sins, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has allowed for us to be here today. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows how busy we are in our daily life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows what commitments, what troubles, what stress we are having. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has hand selected us to be at a certain place at a certain time. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed for us to be here at this time, at the beginning of the Jummah program. And we look at ourselves every single time, every single day. We look at the problems that we are going through. We look at the stress that we are going through. And we look for a solution. We look for a way out. We look for an answer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always there as the source of our answers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so great. And we know of the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that in a mighty storm, in the heaviest storm that we can think of, on the thickest tree, every single leaf is waiting for the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to permit them to move in the wind. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in control of everything. The air, the water, our body, our lungs. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permits every single time for us to take a breath. Our lungs, our heart, our body would not be able to move, to function without Allah permitting in every single individual organ to operate. So when we look at the problems in our life, we realize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still giving me a solution. That I'm still able, my body is still able. And on top of that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us an extra solution. For Muslims, we have the kalima, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. For the solution of having the kalima, La ilaha illallah, makes us, throughout all the problems, throughout the stress that we are going, a successful person. For the Prophet ﷺ says, whoever utters the kalima La ilaha illallah with a sincere heart will enter into Jannah, will become successful. So throughout all the problems that we have, if we have the kalima La ilaha illallah, when Allah takes that breath away, we are still successful. So you always look towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for our solution. And the Prophet ﷺ says, Ghanimatu majalis dhikrillah al-jannah. The bounty, the booty of being in the gathering where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioned is only paradise. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow that our gathering be a gathering where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is remembered in our hearts. My dear respected brothers and elders, today's topic is about history replaying itself and how we can change it. There's a famous saying for historians, history repeats itself. History repeats itself. And for those who are wise, they would look towards history and take lessons from it. So inshallah today we'll be looking at the history of Islam and the history of Australia and how can we change. We are a nation of proud Muslims. Islam is the greatest religion. Muslims are the greatest nation. And therefore we have great glorious moments in our history. From the time of the Prophet ﷺ to the four rightly guided Khalifas, to moving away from them, looking at the scientific development, Baghdad being a center of knowledge. And another one that we're extremely proud of is the Islamic Spain, the Muslim in Spain, how that became the center of knowledge. These were glorious moments in the history of Islam. And if we look at the history of Muslims in Spain, The Muslims in Spain shot Europe out of the Dark Age, and it brought the Europeans into the Enlightenment age. And this period of Islam in Spain lasted for 800 years. Lasted for 800 years. When I say 800 years, it means there's a specific time period. It began and it ended. We knew it began by the conquest of the Muslims. But do we know why? Why the Muslims only stayed for 800 years? What happened towards the end of that 800 years where Spain is no longer Muslim? There are many factors. There's military factors. There is Islamic madrasas factor, where at the time they did not place any more importance on Islamic education in the pursuit of worldly knowledge. The military was no longer an important factor, and infighting amongst the Muslims, and Muslims eliminating and deserting other Muslims for Western influence. And what it ended up with was that the Muslims were no longer in Spain. And when King Ferdinand and Queen Isabel came to Spain, they decided we have to get rid of every single bit of Islam in Spain. And they demolished many things. But there's certain things that they just, out of the sheer beauty and greatness of the things that the Muslims did, they could not get rid of. There's certain monuments in Spain that is from the Muslim era, and they didn't have the heart to destroy it, but they covered it up. So there are many places in Spain which are still there, Islamic things, but they just covered it up. But going back to why Islam in Spain disappeared, it was because the Muslims began losing their identity. And when they're losing their identity, they began selling their identity. They began realizing, the Western European nations are in the Enlightenment age, and there's a lot of development happening there, forgetting that there was so much development in Islam, and realizing, this is the new trend. I'm going to jump on the paddy wagon, and I'm going to be with Portugal, I'm going to be with the UK, I'm going to be with the France, and this is what was happening. All the kingdoms started, the Muslims separated and started fighting one another. Again, it was an identity crisis. The identity, they wanted to be somebody, so they thought, maybe I'll have my own kingdom, this is our kingdom, but I can't get my kingdom without the Western influence, and so on and so forth. And my dear respected brothers and elders, I'm going to leave this story, this part of history for a moment, and we'll return back to this part of history towards the end of the lecture. We jump to another point in history. Of Australia. And we look at ourselves, we ask the questions, how long has Muslims been here? How long have we been here? So we can probably track, perhaps I'm the first generation, I literally came from the plane, the boat into Australia. Perhaps it's my parents that came, perhaps it's my grandparents. But we can really track back how far back is our family, our roots into Australia. And we are aware, actually there's some other Muslims who've been in Australia for even longer. We know of the Afghan Cameliers. The British brought them in to build Australia. And we're proud of that. We're proud that, alhamdulillah, the Muslims did something to build Australia. The Muslims did something to build Australia, and we left a legacy. We left a legacy of, to this day, the train that runs from the east coast to the west coast is called the GAN, in homage to the Afghans. But these Afghan Cameliers, which we look at them significant at a historical standpoint, what did they actually do? They came for wealth. They came to Australia, they were the working class of Australia, and then they left. A few remained, but then they left with their wealth back to Afghanistan. They left some mosques. There's a mosque in Alice Spring. They left a legacy of names. There's certain Aboriginal tribes or certain Aboriginal families that still have Khan or Muhammad or some Islamic heritage to their last name. So there's the legacy there. But that's the extent that was left. We've got nice roads. We've got whatever they built. The British take credit for it. We take a bit of credit for it. There's the name. There's one mosque. What else was left? Jazakallah, Chacha. The camel was left also. The camel was also left. Australia is the only country in the world that has wild camels. There's no wild camels in any of the Middle East, in Africa. There's no wild camels except in Australia. So that's another thing that the Afghans left. So, but they didn't leave deen. They did not leave deen. Let's imagine if 150 years ago, 1860, they started coming in, the Muslims started propagating deen, started making work, effort on deen. We are only 2% of Muslim today. What percentage would we be? What greatness, significance would Muslims have in Australia? But we can't blame the Afghans. They came with the intention of wealth, and they left with their wealth. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. And we can't single them out. There's another group of people, Muslims, who were in Australia even before the Afghans. And they were here before Captain Cook came to Australia, before the first fleet came to Australia. And who is this group of people? The Indonesians. The Indonesian fishermen or traders that came to north of Australia and traded. And again, what did they leave behind? There's a few sites which can be attributed to them. There's fragments of the language in some of the Aboriginal language that remains, and a note in history that there were Muslims here once upon a time. And we think to ourselves, oh, if only our Afghan forefathers and our Indonesian forefathers made some effort. 1770, the British came. We would have been, at the same time of the British were coming, it wouldn't be a Western country, it'd actually be a Muslim country. It's what if onlys. That's our history. If only the Spains, they thought about it and we united and did this and did that. If only. And so we've spoken about 3 periods of history. We've spoken about the Spanish Muslims in Spain. We spoke about the Afghan cameleers, and we've spoken about the Indonesian traders who came. And I'm going to jump. We're talking about if only. What did happen to some Muslims that were taken away? We keep in mind that those who came to Australia came for wealth. Afghans and Indonesians came to Australia for wealth. The Indonesians or Malays at the time were taken from Indonesia, Makassar, and put in South Africa, Cape Town, and they were brought as slaves. So they went against their will. They didn't think, I'm going to go to Cape Town and I'm going to start a business and I'm going to have all this money and take home. They realized they're going there forever and they're going to do work forever and get nothing for it. But what they held on was their religion, their Islamic heritage. And although the Dutch was cruel in stopping them, there's horrendous stories how they tried to stop the Muslims from being Muslims. They still practiced Islam quietly and secretly, till the point that when the struggle for apartheid came, the Muslims were side by side with all the Africans. Nelson Mandela shared a cell right next to a Muslim person. When the Muslims were side by side in liberating South Africa. And then after that, Muslims had the freedom to be Muslims. And they were able to open up madrasas, many madrasas, that I'm a product of South Africa madrasa. And people from around the world are now going to South Africa to learn Islamic studies and going back to their countries and building their community. So in a way, I'm also a product of them and I'm trying to emulate it here. So that's what can happen. They're only 5%, but in South Africa they call the silent majority because alhamdulillah they did a lot of work and they allowed for Islam to grow there. Now we jump back to another point of history. So I've spoken about the Spain, I've spoken about the Afghans, I've spoken about the Indonesians, I've spoken about Cape Town. What if we stayed in Australia and made effort in Australia, what could have happened? Just like in Cape Town or South Africa. And we jump back to just 10, 20 years ago. And this is going to be a personal story of mine that I would like to share with the congregation, inshallah. I was born in Redcliffe in Australia, so Brisbane, so just an hour north of Brisbane. I was born here. My parents decided at one stage we're going to go back to Malaysia. My father's from Malaysia. Went back to Malaysia and decided that, you know, for certain reasons we're going to be in Malaysia. Life became a little bit difficult. There were more opportunities in Australia and education in Australia. So having my Australian passport, Australian citizenship, as my family decided, all right, let's go back for a better life in Australia. Let's go collect that money. Let's go collect that wealth in Australia. So we came to Australia, and the focus was that I've got an objective, get my education, get all the opportunities that Australia has to offer, take that and benefit from it. So we moved to a country town in Lismore, that's northern New South Wales on the border with Queensland. We were the only Muslim family. There was another Muslim family that we met once or twice a year. And every year it was the same as any other year. We'd make no effort. My mother would make as much as she could to raise the children as Muslims. My objective was there's nothing in Lismore. I need to go, once I finish high school, once I finish my schooling, I'm going to go somewhere else, go to Brisbane, go to university, get my degrees, and then I'm going to prosper. So I finished my high school, I went to university, I got my degrees. Then I got my degrees from UQ and QUT. Then I looked back at my lifetime in my life in Lismore. What was there? What did I do? And was there any impact? I was there, I did nothing. I was scared as a Muslim. I had a problem. I had an identity struggle. I struggled to be a Muslim because there's no other Muslims there. And with all the problems and turmoil that's going around the world, it wasn't a thing that I want to go around and say, hey guys, I'm a Muslim. You know, I'm not going to come to a gathering and say, yeah, I'm a Muslim, and be nice to me. So it's always that I'm not going to deny it, but I'm not going to spread it either. And that was my time in Lismore. And the only impact that my family ever had in Lismore was that my mother was on the front cover of the newspaper twice. The reason, my mum wore a scarf and she was participating in some community event, and they thought it would sell more newspapers, so let's take a photo of this lady in a scarf and sell the newspaper. So we are etched in history there, just like the Afghans are etched in the Australian history, just like the Indonesians are etched in the Australian history. My family is etched in the Lismore history by one photo of my mother, two photos of my mother in the newspaper. And we left. And there was very little that was done to Lismore. Alhamdulillah, now there's a Muslim community in Lismore that's growing and making effort. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them and allow them to grow. But there's nothing from my side. And why? It's the same problem that the Muslims in Spain had, is the identity that they saw something, not something better. They thought that there's other opportunities. So I'm going to put my Muslim identity to one part of my life and more focus on worldly pursuits. And that's what's happened. And we're looking at history. We say, there's the Spanish, there's the Indonesian, there's the Afghans. These are hundreds of years. Can't they see it? But then we look at ourselves today. I look at myself. I'm just repeating what they've done. And we ask ourselves, sitting in the audience, am I just like that? Did I come to Australia, or am I in Australia just to reap the benefit that Australia has? We know Australia is one of the best countries to live in the world. Am I reaping just that and contributing nothing to Australia? So we look at ourselves again and we contemplate, am I giving back to Australia? We don't want to strike ourselves out in Australia. The Indonesian traders, they didn't do anything, strike one. The Afghan cavaliers, they didn't do anything, strike two. Now, I'm counting myself, am I going to strike myself out? Strike three and you're out. Are we going to be a nation in Australia that in 100 years' time, they will say, there was 70, 60, 70, 80 different Muslim nations in Australia as a historical mark, but nothing ever happened. Just like the Afghans is there for the historical mark, the Indonesians there for a historical mark. Are we just going to be a mark in history where we were here and we, as Muslims, whether we're born here, many generations from here, are we just going to be a mark in history where we never contributed? We look at what Muslims have done across the world when they actually tried. In Cape Town, they made a madrasa, people went there. Indonesia, they made madrasas, people were going there. Malaysia, people were going there. When is Australia, when are we going to make a mark in Islamic history to move forward? And I'd like to conclude the talk by sharing a story, a personal story of a youngster that I was speaking about, a very, very, very young youngster. He's only 5 years old. He's going to kindergarten, and I asked him, do you tell your parents, do you tell your teacher that you're a Muslim? He says, no, I don't. I said, why? He said, oh, I'm so embarrassed. He's embarrassed to tell his teacher that he's a Muslim. So there's things that are happening there, and alhamdulillah, our schooling system here is quite in touch with what's going on. They know if a boy is Muslim or not, but they don't know everything to do with Islam. So if there was a Christmas song, then he'd feel obliged to stand there, maybe not sing, but maybe even sing. So he's a bit embarrassed to say he's a Muslim. This is a 5-year-old. This is a 5-year-old. What if at 5 years old they're already embarrassed to say that they're a Muslim? What is happening with our 6, 7, 18, 20, 21, 25, 30-year-olds that are around here, all the Muslims that are around here, our youth that are here, that perhaps they are also going through an identity struggle. They're going through an identity struggle where they can't reconciliate the Muslim part of them and the Australian part of them. They can't make themselves an Australian Muslim. I went to an identity struggle. I'm trying to bring my Australian and my Muslim together, my Islam and my Australianness together, until alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided me, gave me opportunity when I was looking for guidance. Allah allowed me to connect to a scholar. Allah allowed me to be in the company of a scholar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed me not to just do that, but start learning and contributing back to the community by teaching at madrasas, being involved with youngsters, regaining my identity by being out there, by giving back to the community, regaining my identity by actually sitting and learning, sitting and studying. I realized what an Australian Muslim is, and that Australian Muslim is not words that can't be together. They're not opposite words. They're a word that can fit together perfectly. Australian Muslim can fit together. And this is what happened when I sat by the scholars, when I spent some time to learn. It gave me confidence, it gave me an identity, it gave me self-worth and objective. So my dear respected brothers and elders, we are aware of the problems that are out there, but are we aware of the struggles that our youngsters are going through? Have we spoken to them and find out what are your daily struggles? What are your daily struggles? And how do you, what do you want to do in life? And we guide them. We guide them back to the ulama. We guide them back to knowledge. That when we send them to madrasas, we send them to sit in the company of the scholars, the imams. We're fortunate we have 5 imams here that they can choose from. And we enroll them into some sort of program that they can become confident, inshallah. And by saying that we have a lot of things happening here in Slacks Creek. We have a lot of things that are happening here in our mosque that are not happening in any other mosque in Queensland or in Australia. So it's a time for us to decide, are we going to make a positive change that in one day in history will say that Muslims from Fiji, Muslims from New Zealand, Muslims from Samoa are all coming to Australia to become alims? Are they all coming to Australia, Brisbane, Slacks Creek, to gain Islamic knowledge and reclaim their Muslim identity and take it back take their identity back to their home country and start growing their home country. Saying that we are having an open day tomorrow for all the programs that we have from 11 o'clock to 2 p.m. at Slacks Creek, at the office there. You can come and speak to all of the teachers, send your youngsters, in the least get to know who the imams are. Have a chat, have a hello, have a coffee, have a drink, have a whatever. Just get to know the imams and let them know your name. And give them your contact number that they can contact you or your children, inshallah. Inshallah. Then that's the conclusion of my lecture, inshallah. We make an effort that whatever we can do to change Australia for the better of all the Muslims. We make a sincere effort for that, inshallah.